whenever I step on an airplane, I'm always intrigued by people who are sitting there, like myself, and we're ready for the flight to start, and we're kind of given this pre-flight safety pep talk. And you know the drill, gestures, how to get off the plane, everything. And what always intrigues me is how people just routinely ignore this life-saving information, right? I mean, I'm sure you've seen it, people texting and, you know, kind of trying to get one more, you know, email and you know, looking at the barf bag and how to throw up in 3 different languages and it's just intriguing to me that here they are giving us life-saving information and we are pretty much just blowing it off. I remember several years ago I was on a flight actually from DC to San Diego. It was a red-eye flight, and this was before all the regulations were in place. It was kind of a different ballgame back then. Anyway, there were only about, I don't know, 12, 15 of us on this massive jumbo jet because red-eye flights, East Coast to West Coast, nobody wants to fly and land at 2 a.m. So they actually invited all of us up to first class, which was very cool. We're like a bunch of hicks, you know, going, boy, these are big old seats. And we were loving this. But she did the pre-flight safety pep talk just kind of ad hoc off the mic. And as she did it, people began to sort of embellish her instructions with little clever asides, and that would evoke laughter, and then the laughter got more loud and increased more, and it just kind of by the end it was just raucous. You know, nobody's paying attention. She's sort of gesturing, and everybody's laughing. When it was over, I said to her, "Does it bother you? You know that people don't listen to this stuff. Just trying to make conversation. It's a little bit, but you know what can I do?" And I actually said, "Well, you know what? Let me just tell you. Let me give you a suggestion, because I oftentimes find myself speaking to people who don't really want to hear necessarily what I have to say, like not even knowing that you were going to be watching here today." And I actually shared with her the information that I want to share with you now, because I think a lot of us find ourselves in a similar situation. We are giving kids literally life-saving information. You're gesturing, you're using your media, you're talking about stuff that you've worked on, how to kind of get out alive and make it through. And we're just kind of, you know, sitting there talking to people who are disinterested and disengaged and texting and whatever. I shared with her a very, very simple principle. I said this, I said, you know what, the hardest part of teaching is not teaching. The hardest part of teaching is getting people to listen to you teach. The most important task I think that we have is trying to kind of arouse the interest of our audience. You may have heard it put like this, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. I think one of the easy mistakes to make, and I know sometimes if I'm not careful, I drop in, is I get so excited about what I want to teach that I forget my audience. My students, my group, my small group, my youth group, they're not interested necessarily in what I want to teach. And I forget that my first task is to make the horses thirsty. How do I make these horses thirsty? You know, especially when you think about, I mean, I don't know about your youth group, but if you think about the average youth group, you've got kids who show up on a Wednesday night or a Sunday night, and on the way over, one of them got a speeding ticket, somebody else got a warning slip in English, and somebody else got broken up with their boyfriend, and somebody else got invited to the prom, and somebody else got unfriended on Facebook by their mom, and so you get all these different kind of mindsets, and they walk into the room and you say, tonight we're going to talk about the Gospel of Matthew. It's wonderful to talk about the Gospel of Matthew, but I have to think about how am I going to make these horses thirsty for that particular drink? How do I get them engaged? There are 3 ideas that I think you and I have to consider in trying to sort of surmount that challenge. And if we can think of those 3 ideas, we can sort of reckon with those 3 ideas, I think it helps us to a little bit better sort of think about how am I going to shape my lesson, my talk, my devotional. How am I going to do this better so that I can actually make the horses thirsty? The first of the challenges I think we face is what sometimes in the realm of communication is called selective attention. Selective attention. If you're married, You already know what selective attention is, right? Your spouse gives you 3 simple requests, one of which happens to be something you wanted to do, and doggone it, by the time you get home, you realize I forgot the other 2. The only one you actually heard, the one you remembered, is the one you actually wanted to be a part of in the first place. Selective attention is recognizing that every single time I speak to a group of kids, in my small group, in my Sunday school class, or in a devotional, or in a huddle group or club, is that I've got to make sure that I recognize they have the capacity to vote whether or not they're going to listen to me. They can't listen to everything. Everybody has to practice selective attention. You think about all the voices they hear in the course of the day from the coach, from their friends, from the media, from their parents, from their teachers. They've got to screen out some stuff. They got to select. So one of my first priorities said, okay, I want to make really sure that I am giving them a reason to select this lesson, this talk. And if that means articulating one of their questions, if it means using media, if it means kind of engaging them in discussion, the first challenge I've got to surmount is selective attention. Second challenge I've got to think about is miscomprehension. Let's say they do actually pay attention to me. It could happen. Well, I got to make sure they understand what the heck I'm talking about. And miscomprehension is, I think, a real challenge, because most of our kids have grown up in a culture that is kind of biblically illiterate. They don't use the language that we are often comfortable with. I went to seminary. I kind of learned the lingo, and it's good and rich language, and it needs to be taught. But they don't walk in necessarily literate in that language. So, I say to the kids, you're a sinner. They don't know what that means. They're like, oh, thanks. We do what we can. They go, I can't be a sinner. I'm too short to play sinner. And they just don't have in their kind of lexicon these terms. So it's not enough just for me to get their attention. I want to always be thinking about, how can I put this in language they understand? In my very first youth ministry position, I was in the suburbs of Massachusetts, and the kids were biblically illiterate. So just to give you one example, I realized right away that when I'd say John 3:16 or Ephesians or 2, they had no clue where to go, what to do, what that was about. So I just started Xeroxing the text of the page we were going to study in the Bible, and instead of handing out the whole Bible and trying to have them find it, which would require a lock-in, I just said, look, you could just read this one page. Cool thing too, and I didn't even think about this, is because it was a highly Roman Catholic community, and this is not Roman Catholic teaching, but this was sort of their impression, is that the Bible is this sacred relic and they couldn't write in it or anything. I could say, circle that phrase, put a star over there, but I could also choose the translation that we were going to actually use to teach. Because if you think about it, let's say you're a 13-year-old guy and somebody reads John 3:16 in their Bible, but it's not one single word that you see in your John 3:16, that's confusing, it's frustrating. So that's just one example of how I try to surmount this challenge of miscomprehension. I gotta be bilingual. And then the third challenge, this is not easy, is selective forgetting. Selective forgetting, right? I mean, let's suppose that you actually did gain their attention and they did actually understand what you were going to say. The question is, how do I now hook this into their life tomorrow, next week, when they go back into class or go back with their family? And I think one of the keys there is simply to make sure that every single time I teach a lesson, I anchor it back into the real life world in which they live. For me, that means thinking in terms of 5 arenas. Maybe this will help you, maybe not. But I always go, every time I'm doing a lesson, a talk, or whatever, I want to hook it into either their school, that's their life at school, their family, self-explanatory, their friends of the same sex, friends of the opposite gender, their kind of interior life, stuff they fear, stuff they hope for, stuff they worry about, and then lastly is their spiritual life. Because even if they're not Christians, they still have a hunger, a God-shaped vacuum, to use Pascal's term, in their heart that they want to fill. Every single time we do a lesson, I want to tie the truth of that lesson back into one or more of those arenas, because that gives them a way to practice this truth, to retain this truth, to sustain this truth back into their lives, and to kind of surmount this challenge of selective forgetting. You and I, we want these kids to hear this stuff. We know this is life-saving information, but we got to make the horses thirsty, and that means we got to overcome the problem of selective attention. We got to overcome the problem of miscomprehension. We got to make sure they can retain this stuff, remember this stuff when they're gone. Thank you for your ministry. Thanks for loving the Word and loving those kids. It's been a pleasure to be with you.